ask for money for Christmas so we could go and buy the equipment. And so I set out for the West End of London and a drum shop with what would, well, we're talking a long time ago, but it was actually $15. And for $15 I got a bass drum, snare drum, a couple of cymbals. They were terrible. And I also bought a book on drumming, which I still have, but have not quite got round to reading.
But then to continue the car theme for just a moment, your first real interaction with Roger Waters took place because he wanted to borrow your car.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And I wouldn't lend it to him. And he's still resentful.
And then when you were a college student, an architectural student, as was Roger, there was then a series of bands. All of the bands then had Roger in them, right? The T-Set.
There were the T-Set, the Megadeths, the Architectural Abdabs, Leonard's Lodgers, and finally Pink Floyd.
Well, there was a Sigma something in there.
Oh, and the Sigma 6, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And eventually one of the bands had you and Roger and Rick.
Yeah, I think Rick was in most of those. In fact, I think Rick was in all those bands, actually. Roger, Rick, and myself, yeah.
Okay, and then it wasn't just Pink Floyd, it was the Pink Floyd sound.
The Pink Floyd sound, yeah.
Yes,
that's right.
And then the Pink Floyd.
And finally, Pink Floyd.
Yes.
And eventually to be Floyd, and then just be...
You know, it seems so odd to see some of the early concert posters, and also some of the early record labels that actually say, The Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
But you know, if you go back and get the original 45 of Sunshine of Your Love, it says The Cream.
Yeah. It actually wouldn't have been, it would have been Lloyd. Sorry, unnecessary, but...
Well, you and Roger were from the architectural school. Then over in Cambridge was Sid Barrett and David Gilmour and their group of friends. And how did you all merge together as one?
Well, initially it was Sid coming to London. He was then going to study at Camberwell Art School. And because he knew Roger, I think, we had an apartment together in one of our tutors had a house, and we used to work for him in the summer. He was an architect, and we had I think it was a 3-room apartment with in his house, and Sid came down. That was somewhere to stay.
You had a 3-room apartment in London, and you were how old?
Well, first, second, third year college. So
I would say
1890.
Today you'd have to be in Pink Floyd to afford a 3-room apartment in London. So, who actually? Well, it was an evolution of all these different bands that you went through, and eventually, you were all together. And in 1967, you, in fact, became successful. Famous to a certain degree. You were performing on television and traveling and recording for a big record company, and those you weren't necessarily making a good living yet, but
we're making a very poor living.
But the public was catching on. David Gilmour said on our show when he was on yesterday morning that when he left his job as a van driver in London to take the Pink Floyd job, initially, at least for the first year, it was a pay cut.
That's absolutely right, yeah. It was a great shame, really, because it would have been nice if he'd stayed with the van driving, because then we could have used the van to move the equipment.
Well, as the drummer, when you are a young band and you don't have budget for a big staff to assist you, it means you have to haul all that stuff around by yourself, which is a lot different than just carrying a guitar case.
Yeah, absolutely. The best thing to do, in my opinion, is to learn to play the flute.
So your first trip to the United States with Pink Floyd was?
1967, it would have been, summer of 67, I guess. And we went straight in at the deep end, played at the Winterland in San Francisco, and with Janis Joplin, which was then Big Brother and the Holding Company's top of the bill, Richie Havens.
We'll set the controls from the Heart of the Sun and you'll see video of that a little bit later. You performed that on Dick Clark's show, didn't you?
I can't. We wouldn't have performed. I don't think we did set the controls, but hey, I don't know. You know, I can't remember it all.
The point I'm trying to make is that when you came to the United States and appeared on a lot of the pop music programs that were popular at the time, it was even though in fact there had been for 4 years beforehand successful English rock bands that had preceded you, nobody quite had the experience that Pink Floyd brought to the tube.
Well, they were very odd, the television shows, anyway, because they were all miming situations. No one did live music on television because, first of all, well, certainly in the UK, they couldn't cope with the sort of sound levels. The BBC engineers who tried to deal with it used to go completely mad and say, "You've broken all our microphones, overloaded," and so on. So it was all sinking at the time in those days.
And then, of course, along came 1972, and the world changed in a major, major way.
Yeah. What happened? Oh, no, I know what happened. Well, 73, really, I guess. 72, we were working on it, but 73 was the release of Dark Side, and that it did change everything for us, because we suddenly moved from being a band who really didn't have any money, and consequently the show reflected that, to having being able to really invest in all the theatrical aspects of the show that we wanted to do.
And that, of course, was a decision that you guys had to make on your own, because you were the ones making the investment.
Yeah, but that's true for all bands.
Yeah, but it shows the level of, I mean, you know, things are different today than they were then. And it shows the level of respect that you had for your fans, because you were willing to invest so much in giving them a truly unique experience.
Well, I think we faced up to the fact that none of us could moonwalk or do any of those sort of great things that sort of make a stage show. And so we always had focused on this idea of doing something else, and particularly using film rather than eventually. I mean, eventually everyone had the big screens with video of what was going on stage. And we always felt that was not really interesting enough. Someone said once, "Why don't you just use computers to play the music?" And we said, "Well, the reason is they move around too much."
Well, you know, yesterday the pig flew over London.
Well, yes, it flew. It did.
It was Monday. Monday, the pig. Yes, today's Wednesday. Monday it flew.
Yes, it flew above London, but hopefully not sort of over London,
like
it did in the old days.
Yes. when it went loose and went right into the flight path of the planes going into Heathrow, so they had to divert the air traffic.
Yeah, that was quite worrying.
Went up to 30,000 feet or something like that.
We don't know how high it went, because it was the radar couldn't track it, and the police helicopter lost it very early on because it was going too fast.
It was found in a farmer's field and still exists in storage somewhere.
Yeah, no, it is pretty elderly now. No, there was a belief it had been made by the people who made the original Zeppelins, and it was believed to be heading home to Germany.
The first phase of the archival releases took place yesterday. There is an incredible amount of Pink Floyd material that you're sharing with the world that none of us knew about, but apparently you did. When did you become aware that there would be a real demand to hear and see this material?
Well, I think we're just beginning to understand that now with the release. I mean, I think when the idea was originally sort of put forward, we had no idea really what we did have. And certainly quite a lot of things that we did have we thought were unplayable or just not suitable or whatever. So there was quite a sort of there was an extended period of finding out really what we'd got and then trying to evaluate it.
I mean, you had like the Stefan Grappelli.
Yeah.
That piece, which was never heard.
Well, that's perhaps the perfect example of something that we thought had been lost forever. This was a track this was Wish You Were Here, the original soundtrack, where we had managed to. It's really weird, this thing behind us, isn't it? Because it's either someone smoking a huge spliff,
or there's a large Jamaican man behind the curtain.
or it's part of the stage effects. I'll get used to it. Where were we? What were we talking about? We were talking about Stefan Grappelli.
Wish You Were Here.
Yeah, Stefan Grappelli. And Stefan was a well-known jazz violin player who worked with Django Reinhardt. And he'd been recording down the corridor at Abbey Road with Yehudi Menuhin, the classical violin player. So they came to visit us in the studio, and some really switched on. One of us, we don't even remember who, suggested that they play on the record. Well, Yehudi didn't want to, he was not comfortable improvising, but Stefan absolutely thought, yeah, why not, do it. And did a couple of passes. And then it sort of got forgotten about. And I thought we had run out of tracks and decided we weren't going to use it on the final record, and so it'd been replaced with vocals or something else. But in fact, it had been kept. Slightly complicated thing of how we recorded in those days, that we were always short of tracks when we were overdubbing. So what had happened was that the engineer was popping in and out, so when there was a vocal on, he'd pop in and record the vocal and then pop out and leave the violin on this track. So it's really thanks to EMI and the people at EMI that they found the box with this in, and I think it wasn't even written up on the box, so they actually listened to the tape and found that there it was. And I think it's a really lovely little piece of music, and I still don't understand why we didn't use it originally, because I think it enhances the track.
Well, it's clear that all three surviving members of Pink Floyd are excited about this three-phase release of material because all three of you are going out in public and talking about it and sharing your experiences, and it's kind of complicated, so I have notes. Okay, all right, because it is complicated, but these are the different editions. The Discovery editions are the original 14 albums digitally remastered with booklets, and they come as newly designed digipacks. And the Experience editions are 2 disc sets for the Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here albums. The original album remastered plus live bonus material from the legendary Dark Side of the Moon performance at Wembley in 1974 that David told me he thought wasn't a very good performance, but then when he saw it, he was convinced that it was. And for the Wall album coming next year, the original album remastered in the 2nd disc, featuring a selection of earlier album demo recordings from different stages of the album. And then there's the Immersion box sets. There's one right here on the table. For Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. They are multi-disc sets containing CDs, DVDs, and Blu-ray, and have previously unreleased demos, alternative studio takes, original quad and 5.1 surround sound mixes, chore screen films, just lots of different things. So they're all
Have you all remembered that now? Because
all different things. And then there's the box set of all 14 albums. I mean, it's just incredible. And
World tour next year.
I know that Pink Floyd fans, thank you for going through the trouble, to come up with this for us. Now, David Gilmour, when the light hit him and he was standing on top of the wall in the O2 Arena, the crowd went crazy. You were there. He said he was nervous.
Yeah, I think he was. Well, it'd been a long time. Well, I think, first of all, playing, particularly when you haven't played for a little while, and David hadn't played for a bit, you're a little uneasy of just remembering whether you can remember that whole part and so on. But the real thing is, for that particular moment, you're something like 40 feet up in the air, just standing on a platform, and it's pretty scary. I mean, I was very happy to be down in the audience.
Now I have some questions from the audience, if you don't mind. when is the Delicate Sounds of Thunder coming out on DVD?
We haven't made any plans for that yet, but I imagine that once we've got these particular sets out of the way, we'll have another look at everything else, really. I mean, I personally would like to do the sort of early, all the early records, maybe combine some of them, because we have certainly got a few bits and pieces that are in the vaults of either Syd Barrett songs that were never officially released, and even some demos that we made before we even had a record deal, which are also really nice songs of Syd's and not that badly recorded.
Now, David Gilmour who replaced Syd, was Syd's very close friend, and continues to perform Syd Barrett songs to this day when he does
I think
solo performances.
We all feel that it's really important. We have no wish to try and sort of brush Syd out of the history. For a lot of people, Syd is a really important part. I mean, there's always a school of thought that think that Pink Floyd ended when Syd Barrett left. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to recognise him, and his songs have lasted extremely well. I think they very much sort of set a style that was prevalent in the late 60s, that sort of English pastoral, sort of English accents rather than American accents. That's the difference.
What is your favourite song to perform?
2 or 3, really. Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, because it's played with mallets rather than sticks. It has a very different feel to most of the things that most rock bands play and things that we play. So I'd probably cite that as one. And then, of course, there's things like Comfortably Numb, because it's an interesting drum part anyway, because it's a very sparse drum part. It's actually for the first part of the song anyway, and it's always fun to sort of have a real thrash around during the guitar solo at the end.
Now, we know how much your first drum kit cost. How old were you when you first started playing the drums?
13, 14, something like that.
So you started late.
Yeah, very late, because of course, having done a little bit of playing then, I more or less stopped until I got to college, and it suddenly seemed a really good idea to hook up with Roger and Ray.
You did say in your book, Inside Out, that when you were in college studying architecture, at that point you had already considered yourself to have retired from music.
Right. Fortunately, I've never announced that, so it's fairly easy to pick the sticks up again.
Okay, now, you're the only person who has always, from its very formation to this day, been in Pink Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You're the only one.
The only one.
So this question is really appropriate for you, that came from one of our friends here. What was, if you have one, your favorite time period of Pink Floyd?
Well, I think there's a sort of, the answer to that is there isn't a favourite time period, because each section almost of what we did, which can be marked either with years or with albums, and perhaps particularly with albums, has a very different sort of flavour to it. So there's always going to be a sort of affection for the really early days, because we were completely dedicated in a way. There were no musical differences of any sort, because we all wanted to be pop stars and all wanted to get on television, all wanted to make that first record, all wanted to have a hit. So it was a very sort of easy time, and even though we were doing, miles and miles in the back of a transit van up and down the motorways of England, it was a great period. But then, you can then move. We won't go through the entire career with every album, but go to the last tour, where it's the private jet and everything, and first class hotels and stuff like that, and that was great too, because it was it was actually a huge sort of touring group with lots of extra musicians and backing singers and so on. And actually, you cannot fail but to have a wonderful time doing that. It is the ultimate, the job that everyone would like.
Well, you said you wanted to be pop stars and you wanted to have a hit, and one of the people in this room came up with this. What was Pat Boone's TV show like? And how did you feel when Syd didn't say anything to Pat?
Well, pretty bad, I suppose. Did everyone see Roger the other night on the Fallon show? I mean, Roger did the whole thing beautifully. I thought he explained, the song that had been sung, but it was truly alarming, really, because Sid was. He was not mad, really. He was messing about. So he'd just go into this catatonic trance as soon as they started trying to tape anything. And so for the rest of the band, it was absolutely frightening. And at the end of the show, when Pat Boone came to talk to Sid, we were all trying to shuffle our way in front of him. But there was that awful sort of collision you could see coming up. And fortunately, I can't remember what Pat asked him, but it was something fairly innocuous. And Sid fortunately just said, something about what he liked, and Sid looked at him for a moment while we shuddered and went white with fear. And I think Sid then just said, "America." The audience hooted and hollered, and off we went.
Another audience question. In the intro to Time, was that ad-libbed or pre-rehearsed?
It was absolutely, it was ad-libbed in so much as that I think we more or less just switched the recorder on and played it. But the big thing about that was that I'd never seen Rototoms before. Someone had left them in the studio from a session earlier in the day. And we just thought, hang on, we better do this before they come and collect them. So it was a fairly sort of rushed job. But again, having listened to the 74, the live performance from Wembley, I thought they sounded they were really good. Actually, I preferred the Rototom playing on the Wembley show than the one on the record.
Have you ever gone to see a Pink Floyd tribute band?
Yeah, they're brilliant. They do everything perfectly. Every mistake I've ever made is lovingly reproduced. And I don't know if you're probably familiar with the Australian Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Probably the sort of best of them. Well, the Australian Pink Floyd have gone too far, in my opinion. Now. I don't know if you know it, but I think one of them has left having musical differences.
That is true. That's
You
true.
sort of think you'd have seen it coming. I seem to me to be taking it too far.
Okay, what's the correct pronunciation of Umaguma?
Well, I think Umaguma's fine. There are people. It's not Umaguma.
Who asked the question? That was yours.
And it can
Okay.
be Umaguma.
Either Umaguma or Umaguma.
It can be whatever you like, really. It's a Fenland expression, the area outside Cambridge.
You have his permission to interpret it any way you wish.
Express yourself. Express yourself through Umaguma.
Comic part mother.
If you could relive or change one experience while in Pink Floyd, what would it be? That's a tough question.
What, you mean like change the bass player?
That's cold.
I wouldn't dream of it, and I'm having dinner with
And remember,
Roger later.
Nick gets along with everyone. And a few years ago, when I was with Nick at Barnes & Noble at Union Square for a similar Q&A and book signing, when we left, standing out in the street, totally unnoticed, which kind of freaked me out, standing out on the street in front of the bookstore, waiting for Nick to go out, was Roger. That's right. Yeah.
I know, right?
You were there that day?
You were there. You really upset him.
Okay, this is an important one. If you could do it all over again, would you choose to be a drummer in a rock band or a champion Formula One driver?
Well, the big problem is I seem to have the ability to play drums at sort of this sort of level, whereas my driving, much as I love motor racing, I don't think Lewis Hamilton has sleepless nights worrying about whether I might be taking his job. I love motorsport, but to some extent it's the perfect antidote to being in the band, and in some ways part of the pleasure of it is that I don't actually have to do it as a job, because that's when if anyone follows motor racing, that's when you really earn your money. Is when the weather's bad, it's raining, or there's something wrong with the car. I'd like to do it for fun, not as a job.
Well, in a few minutes, you're going to see, a big screen is going to come down here. You're going to see footage from a Brighton concert in 1972 with 2 instrumental pieces. Set the controls from the Heart of the Sun, which we were talking about with the mallets before. And careful with that axe, Eugene. Then a 25-minute documentary on the making of Dark Side. Then 15 minutes of some of the concert screen films from the 1975 North American tour. And that was really something where you guys were absolute innovators.
Yeah, well, as I said, I think we were really looking for other ways of sort of really engaging the audience with what's going on stage, particularly in the larger venues. It's one thing, relatively small venue, because you're in touch with people, you can see them, they can see you. But as the places get bigger and bigger, the people at the back, it's harder to sort of get them to focus on what's going on. So the film seemed to be a really good way of ensuring that people were engaged with what was going on. And we really, I think Roger and I mainly were more involved than the other two in making these films, but actually putting them together was really good fun, and we had some very talented people over the years who worked on them. And it was really from that we ended up with the whole older work with Gerald Scarfe, which it was really an honour to work with Jerry. He's enormously talented and has done some fantastic work for us.
And your dad was a filmmaker.
My dad was a filmmaker. He mainly made films about motor racing and cars, which surprisingly seems to have caught
Rubbed off on you.
in some weird way.
Well, I also want you to know that when you leave here tonight, everybody's getting a copy of the new Dark Side.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
And one of you is getting this immersion box set. Okay, we're having a drawing for that. That's the big deluxe edition. And I wanted to ask just quickly here.
When's the tour start?
Please. I'll tell you what, ask Roger or David that.
Why aren't you playing with Roger now?
Hmm?
Why aren't you playing with Roger now?
Because really the way the Wall Show works now is it's not really conducive to a drummer appearing on stage. I mean, Graham is a terrific drummer, but it's a proper job really playing that show now, and it's not the sort of fun it would be if you're at the front of the stage.
No.
But when it is fun, it's fun. I've seen you recently. I saw you in London perform, and you guys had a great time on the stage.
Yeah. No,
on
now
the
and
stage
again,
there in Hyde
podcasting.
Park.
Yeah.
And your face had a lot of joy on it. I saw you. I was standing this close to you 10 minutes after your performance in Hyde Park in 2005. You were glowing.
Yeah.
You were